Welcome to the Asbestos Knowledge Empire.
What does asbestos management mean to you?
I used to really struggle with the asbestos management at my site, but now it's a breeze.
It used to be really expensive. I was paying loads, but now I've got my asbestos power team in place. It's so much easier.
Asbestos can be a pain in the arse if not handled right.
We had to stop the job because asbestos was discovered. Now we don't have that problem.
Asbestos management is easier than you think. Asbestos management. Be proactive, not reactive. Think about asbestos first, not last.
And now your hosts, best-selling authors and asbestos experts, Ian Stone and Neil Munro.
Welcome to the Asbestos Knowledge Empire. My name's Neil Munro.
I'm Ian Stone.
So today we're going to talk about the asbestos management journey. So basically going from zero knowledge or zero sort of compliance with regards to asbestos management all the way back to the end. We're fully compliant, know everything, and we're all good.
Yeah, it's kind of a bit of a mind map, a bit of a brain dump of what's in our heads on this whiteboard.
Yeah, definitely. So it's going to be going live out on YouTube and also across the podcast.
Yes, exactly.
So if you are happy listening to it, all good. But if you do want to see any of the details, go on to the Asbestos Knowledge Empire YouTube channel.
If you want to see my handwriting that looks like a spider's crawled in some inkwell and crawled across this board, then you're welcome to.
Happy days. So where do we start then?
Where do we start? Yeah.
Desktop study.
Desktop study.
So Ian's going to do the writing.
Try.
Yeah, so what is a desktop study? So it's basically a gathering of information, really. So what sort of stuff do we want to look for? Really, the starting point is you need to identify what buildings fall under the requirement. Mm-hmm. So Regulation 4 talks about all non-domestic premises have to basically manage their asbestos. And basically you need to sort of collate what buildings are relevant to you, where does that duty apply to. So getting together a big list of your sites, and also if you know their building age,
yes,
is another point to cover, because then that helps you determine what buildings you may need to inspect. And as a rule of thumb, as Ian's just written, anything built prior to 2000 would or could contain asbestos.
Yeah, it falls under that requirement, doesn't it? To identify and assess.
Yeah. So this is you starting to sort of build a picture and build a list of what kind of sites that you've got present and which ones you may need to sort of inspect. So and that could include if you've got information on extensions or new builds, because if it's a new build, then you kind of you can sort of like take that to the bottom of the list because there's no requirement to obviously do anything further with that.
Yeah, exactly. Like Neil said, it's just getting that basic list together of what stock have I got.
Yeah.
And when was it built? And then you kind of move on from there, don't you?
Yeah. So once you've identified all your different buildings and they're falling into this sort of criteria, that category, what sort of information do you then want to be looking at? Construction information? So definitely the type of buildings that that you've got. And this is really good information if you're going to be then looking for outsourcing sort of the asbestos surveys, etc. Because this is kind of the information that asbestos surveying companies will probably be asking for or want to be able to give you a quote.
So yeah, I've just written up here construction info and also type.
Yeah, type of construction.
Yeah, type of construction.
Type of building it is. So like, just to give you an example, we like to look at sizes of buildings. So if you have got those as well.
That's a very good point, sizes.
So when we're looking at asbestos surveys, costing them, generally what we look for is the type of building it is, the size of it,
and the complexity.
Of it, and if there's any sort of restrictions on access, etc.
Yeah. So just for instance, could have a warehouse that's 10,000 metres squared and it's just an open plan warehouse, really straightforward. Whereas comparing that to a 10,000 square metre hospital or school or university building.
Even offices.
Yeah, offices, definitely. There's kind of a lot more complexities within those.
Yeah, because you've got individual rooms for different ceiling tiles, etc., etc. It's it's completely different. So yeah, that kind of information is really good to go. And sort of like to branch off from that, if you've got plans of the building.
Yep,
they're always a good one.
Plans are amazing.
So although this is good information that you could be sort of putting together for obviously going out to procure asbestos surveys, it's really good information to sort of get your head round all the different sites and
your
locations
building
and
stock.
your buildings, because particularly if you've got one building, it's you're going to know it's pretty simple. But
Yeah, it's a lot more straightforward.
If you've got a portfolio,
Yeah.
this is a good a good starting point to sort of really get to grips of your builders and get to know them.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
There's one other thing on kind of the desktop study stage as well, which is personnel information. This is usually good. I mean, if you've got a massive portfolio, you're not going to be able to go around and speak to every caretaker at every site. But you could put an audit together and ask them to fill in that in if you've got multiple sites.
Yeah.
But yeah, that individual's knowledge. Sometimes it's not recorded anywhere. But they do know that, there was asbestos in this part of the building, this was removed here, it wasn't removed there, I think there's still a problem, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. That's a good point. That kind of leads on to what else you want to be looking at? Previous information. So, previous asbestos survey reports, any removal paperwork.
So surveys, yeah?
Yeah, survey reports. This is on the desktop, mate.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Not moved on yet. I'll leave that there because that's coming next.
Yeah. So like you want to be looking at previous
yes, I see what you mean. Yes, previous
information.
survey information.
Previous surveys.
Should have said.
I did. Previous surveys. Previous removal paperwork.
Yes, definitely.
Sort of clearance certificates, air monitoring certificates. It might even just be bulk sample certificates that you've got. And it's kind of collating all that information because it's a real good starting point. You may identify that from this stage, you've got everything in place. You've got all your surveys in place for all your buildings, and it's all up to date, etc. So this simple exercise, you could be compliant. However, it is going to identify if there is any gaps.
I mean, one thing to look at on surveys and when they were conducted. So 2010, the new survey guide. Always call it the new survey guide, and it's not the new survey guide anymore.
It's 10 years old.
It's 10 years old. I know. I can't help saying it.
Yeah.
So yeah, in 2010, the survey guide was it came out. It replaced the old MDHS 100 document. It was a lot more descriptive and prescriptive about what was needed. So that's kind of that is a level of a line really for when looking at old reports. If you've got a report from say the year 2000, it's not going to be up to date with that guidance, I wouldn't say.
Yeah. Although it was kind of like MDHS 100. Nothing really changed in the actual physical doing the survey element. However, there was very much more of an emphasis on what should be in reports and responsibilities between the client and the surveyor themselves, and there should be sort of agreements between caveats, etc., etc. So there will be a significant difference in the actual reporting element of the asbestos survey, definitely. Anything else on desktop?
Well, I've already moved on one, so I'm not going to move on again until you're ready.
So we've got all the previous paperwork. Like you said, speaking to individuals on site, the existing site managers, because again, like you said, they could have some real good information.
Yeah, it's funny, like the little hints of knowledge that we've found when we've been out doing surveys over the years, isn't it?
Yeah, we've had all that stripped out a long time ago. You're like, really? Okay.
Yeah.
But there's no paperwork for it, so that's a good one. Also, what you could do is, which we've done before, is looking back for financial information. So where you've got invoices from asbestos works, etc., going back through them, there's a bit of a paper trail, and then you can maybe go, if you've got no report and you've paid for an asbestos survey report, you've got the details of the company, you could probably go back to the company
you might need to get a copy.
Get a copy of it. So that's always a good. And getting an idea of what you've spent about asbestos within the areas, etc.
Yeah.
That's a good idea too. Okay, so desktop study. So once you've completed the desktop study, you've got a list of sites. You will have identified what sort you need to do. So whether you've got some surveys that you need to carry out.
Just got to finish off my word.
So this will give you a good indication on the next steps, your next requirements. So you need to safely manage asbestos. Really, once you've identified there's a requirement on site, you need to know where your asbestos is, what condition it's in.
This is the only way to manage it properly. If you don't know where your actual asbestos is, then how can you actually go forward and manage it?
Yeah, it's
very difficult.
Impossible, near enough.
Yeah.
Because what you have to do is presume asbestos is present until you've got evidence it's not. So, you'd literally be managing every element of the building and presuming it's asbestos.
So where would we start?
So, as the name suggests, we'd probably want to undertake an asbestos management survey if you're looking to manage your asbestos within your building. It's a non-intrusive survey. It would access generally all areas of the building where you'd expect sort of normal maintenance activities to take place. So, it's non-intrusive. It would inspect all surface areas of the building. I'd expect it to be going into, ceiling voids, into risers that we can unscrew and take off and inspect within there. Basically accessing everywhere but not damaging the actual physical building as well. It's a sampling survey, so it would collect samples of any suspect materials and then they'd be taken off for analysis, and that would then feed into the actual end report. So that's kind of management surveys.
So part of that is recording the findings, isn't it, of that survey?
So from that survey, you're going to have material risk assessments, and material risk assessments are looking at how easily or how readily that asbestos material will release asbestos fibre should it be disturbed. And then all this information then feeds into create your asbestos register.
Definitely.
So your asbestos register, which really is the kind of the main product that you're looking for. That's the main document that one you need to evaluate, and two need to keep up to date and live. That's kind of the live and ongoing sort of record of your asbestos. Couple of points to sort of mention on those reports is, so the management report will identify asbestos from a management level, so it's non-intrusive, so it's not going to inspect stuff or identify asbestos that may be hidden within the fabric of the building, and that's something to always bear in mind. But what's really important when you're reviewing these survey reports is that you're looking at the whole document, because
it's not just about the asbestos.
It's not just flicking to what have I got. It's also reading the scope of works. So what does the actual survey report scope specify? And that's really key to check, because you need to make sure that the surveying company has inspected everywhere it should have done in line with what they've quoted for and what you've asked for. That's kind of a starting point.
So if you've got a complicated site that's got various neighbours and neighbouring properties, this is the point where you need to check the plans that you've got or the plans that they've produced against the scope to identify that they've surveyed everything within your demise. They've not surveyed something that's your neighbour's demise, or they've equally not surveyed something because they thought it was next door.
Yeah, definitely. If it was ground floor to first floor and they've only done the ground floor, obviously you need to sort of like raise that with them. So scope of works. Equally as important is no access areas. So
definitely
anywhere the surveyor hasn't been able to get in, and also what you need to be aware of is any sort of agreed no access areas as well. Under HG 264, there's a requirement between the client and the surveying company. They have to agree caveats or areas they're not going to access up front. So as part of the quoting stage, there should be a conversation and an agreement between what's the surveying company going to actually access. Is there any areas that they're not going to get into? And to give you a good example of that is live electrics. So because because there's a hazard, a surveyor can't sort of go into live electrical boxes and open them up, because there is a risk of electrocution. So that kind of activity has to be done with a competent electrical engineer to sort of safely open that and decommission the boxes, so the surveyor can get in and access and inspect those.
And the thing is with that, it depends on what your site is and what your requirements are. If you've got a site where there's millions of electrical boxes and they're never accessed, they're never touched, everything's fine, there probably isn't a requirement at this stage to do it.
No.
That they can be noted down that they haven't been accessed and therefore asbestos is presumed within them.
Yeah.
However, for either peace of mind's sake or if you have got lots of electrical boxes that are accessed regularly, well, a great way to kind of get around that is to have a Sparky either come around with the surveying team or at the end of the survey is probably
Yeah,
better.
that's usually the best time and
Yeah.
most cost effective, isn't it?
Yeah, because the surveyor will have accessed everywhere they need to. They'll have noted down as they've gone where all the electrical boxes are they can't get into, and then kind of a bit of a round robin exercise at the end of the survey. They can access those with the electrician.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so yeah, they're some key points on when you're looking at asbestos surveys.
What do we do after surveys?
So once you've got your survey report back, so the survey report should have identified what asbestos is present within that building from a management point of view.
Within that it'll have the material risk assessments.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say.
And the material risk assessment, that looks at the risk of the material releasing asbestos fibre.
Yep.
So that's part of what you take through to the next phase.
So the next part is assessing the risk. So when we talk about asbestos management and regulations, they're all in place under one guiding principle, and it's basically to stop people being exposed to asbestos fibre. That's the whole sort of basis and why these regulations are in place. So once you've identified what asbestos is there, the next is you need to evaluate and risk assess what's the risk of anyone in your building being exposed to asbestos from the materials in your building. Now this looks at what sort of activities happen within the area, what sort of occupancy it's got, how many people are in the area. It looks at what sort of activities happen and what maintenance happens in those areas. And these assessments legally should be undertaken by the duty holder, so the person who's responsible for that building. Now I know, although it's the responsibility of the duty holder, the surveying organisation or your surveying organisation may be able to provide those for you. Now, we help loads of clients with these types of assessments, and we've got a good understanding, a good idea of the types of activities for our experience, and the time frames, and the surveyor can make that judgment while he's undertaking the survey. However, they're not going to have 100% knowledge of your buildings, of what happens in your building. So
No,
that's what
definitely
you have to, you have to essentially sign those off and make any amendments that you need to.
Yeah, it's looking at areas that, I don't know, it could be an area where when the surveyor goes and surveys it, it looks like an empty office, an empty room or something like that. However, little and unbeknownst to the surveyor, in the evening, it's a fully usable room for whatever. But the surveyor's not going to know that. So it's checking that what they've actually assessed that area to be is what the occupancy level kind of is, because that then affects the overall score.
Yeah. So the purpose of these is to identify, what's the risk of two people from these asbestos materials, and when you take these assessments and the materials assessments together, it gives you an overall total risk, and this then helps you formulate your priorities and your actions and what you need to do next. Does that kind of cover all?
That covers priority assessments. Yeah, definitely. I mean, like you said, it's good to labour the point that if you do get your surveyor to do them, you do, as a client, you have got that responsibility.
Yeah, you've got to review them.
Definitely.
The one point that the purpose of this is kind of like lots of clients. What tends to happen when they get the asbestos survey reports back to them, the material risks are scored in an algorithm, and that assessment evaluates them whether they're high to very low risk of releasing asbestos fibre. And if there's something that's high risk, clients kind of think, I need to do something with that. These assessments is where it really sort of puts it all, the bigger picture into context really, and helps you formulate your priorities and your actions and what you really have to do next. Because, for example, you may have a high risk, material risk asbestos material, which is in a very low risk area where no one goes. straight away, you've reduced that risk of somebody coming into contact with that asbestos, where you may have a very low risk material in a very high risk and populated area where, all of a sudden this low risk material then becomes a greater risk of somebody being exposed to it.
Yeah, and just a couple of examples of that. I mean, for a high risk material, it could be pipe lagging, pipe insulation that's got brown and white asbestos in. It could be damaged, it could be all over the floor. However, through the priority assessment, it identifies that it's in a room or a store off of a boiler room where nobody accesses, nobody actually ever goes in. There's no requirement for anybody to go in there, and the door's already locked. And that's it. So you're kind of taking a really high risk material, but it's now a lot lower down the pecking order. And like you said, like a lower risk material could be, I don't know, something like asbestos insulating, asbestos cement in a reception of a school, and 1,000 children are walking past it, kicking footballs, doing whatever kids do. And again, that kind of, it's a low risk material, but in that location, it brings it up through the pecking order.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so the overriding principle, and the thing not to forget, is you need to prevent people being exposed to asbestos, and that's kind of where it's not you have to remove asbestos, it's not you have to survey asbestos, it's it's a duty to manage and prevent people being exposed to it, and this is where these assessments help you make those plans. So next then, so once we've identified the asbestos, we've assessed the risk, we're getting an idea of what needs to be done, or something needs to be done with the asbestos. So next is you need to produce an asbestos management plan.
Yep.
I'll swap sides.
Swap sides.
So the asbestos management plan. So kind of this is the real legal bit. So you have to have a written plan, and the plan should set out what you're going to do to manage that risk. So where you've identified your asbestos, you now know what the risk from those materials are. How are you going to control those now? What procedures and what sort of methods and actions that you're going to be putting in place to prevent people being exposed to it.
Like you said earlier, it's the regulation is the duty to manage, and under that management, it's the duty to not expose people to asbestos.
Yeah.
And the asbestos management plan is the written plan of everything of how you're going to stop that happening. Essentially, how you're going to stop people getting exposed, stop them smashing into asbestos that you already know is there.
Yeah. So to give you an example, so you want to be looking at procedures of how do you prevent works happening without knowing that asbestos is there. So, for instance, how do you supply asbestos information to contractors? How do you control works on your sites? How do you prevent people cracking on with intrusive works without identifying if there's anything there? It's all those procedures in place. Do you need a requirement for your contractors to evaluate whether they've had asbestos awareness training?
Yeah, definitely.
What's your requirement there? Do you insist that you undertake the training, or do you make your contractor undertake the training?
Yeah, and I mean other stuff as well. We're looking at emergency procedures. If it does go wrong, how does it go wrong? How are the contractors getting that information? Is it through a physical paper copy of the register at reception?
Yeah.
Is it through an online database system?
Yeah.
Is it sent out to them? Do they only know about it when they get to site?
Yeah.
It's kind of sharing. How are you sharing your asbestos information?
Yeah. And how are you communicating that as well? Just going back to that, so the asbestos management plan, it has to be a written format. It could be electronic, so you don't have to have a physical copy of it, or you may prefer to have a written hard copy of that document. But you do have to have a kind of a procedure in place of how you sort of deal with that information as well.
Exactly, that's what I was just going to say. It's kind of the management plan. It's easy to say things, and it's easy to say it in all walks of life with everything. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do this. Well, the asbestos management plan is detailing what you're saying you're going to do, but that becomes the kind of the bar of what you're going to be assessed by in the future.
Yeah.
So if you're saying, right, well, all of our contractors are going to come to site and they're going to sign in this log, well, one, you need to provide that log. Two, you need to educate your staff to get the contractors to sign in, and then you also need to audit that log to make sure it's happening.
Yeah.
And that kind of all falls under.
Yeah,
under
that should be all written in your plan.
Yes.
Yeah, so there's lots of it. On some of the complex sites, it's like, how do you deal with refurb projects? You know, what's your procedures in deal with that asbestos? You know, if you've got multiple project managers all off doing projects, how does the asbestos information get fed back into the register, and how is that all updated, etc.?
And I'm going to jump back here from management plan back to surveys to talk about the surveys. So we'll link this back.
Over the top.
And then down here we're going to have refurb surveys.
Yes, so what is an asbestos refurb survey then? So, slightly different to the management survey. So, whereas the management survey is a non-intrusive survey, where we're talking about refurb and demolition surveys, they're full access, you know, intrusive asbestos surveys. So, any areas which is going to be disturbed during the refurb or the demolition, all areas have to be inspected to see if there is any asbestos containing materials. You know, so it is an intrusive and destructive survey. You know, it'll be opening up voids, ceilings where it's fixed ceilings. You know, down to taking windows out, window sills, doors, door frames off. Any, you know, it's basically they need to, asbestos surveyor on these types of survey has to inspect every location which is going to be disturbed essentially.
Yeah, and that's it. It's to access the areas. Access every area before the works actually start.
Yeah.
So they are fully intrusive. They need to be in line with the spec. You want them to be in line with the spec. You want to furnish your asbestos surveyor with a decent specification for two reasons. One, you want to identify where anything is as part of the works, but also you don't want them to go and damage something that's outside the scope of your works.
No, definitely, that is a very good point. Yeah, specifications, I know we've mentioned it quite a few times, that's real key for asbestos surveys, because the asbestos surveyor needs to know all the areas where you're going to be disturbing or you're going to be working in. And sort of key points to highlight is where you've got a specific area refurb, you know, you may be refurbing just one meeting room. It's all the other points as well. So where's the electrics coming from? Where's the new heating system coming from? It's all those routes which sometimes get sort of missed off or forgotten about because the focus is on that specific area.
Definitely. I mean, for instance, in schools, a lot of interactive boards are now placed up, which seems straightforward. Well, the survey's just to the wall. Well, it's not, because if the power isn't coming from the plug directly below, then where is that power coming from? So is it going up through the ceiling void? Where's it being routed back to? We see this a lot with data cabling.
Yeah.
Data cabling, a lot of the time, people look at, well, it's not really part of a refurb because it's just data cabling.
Yeah, data cabling, it's not classed as a refurb, is it? That's kind of just, I'm just putting a new computer in, or I'm just putting a new system.
I'm just pulling some cables, mate.
Yeah.
That's essentially what they think. However, they're still accessing all of these areas. They are usually going through the ceiling void. They might come across fire breaks. If they're coming across fire breaks that are 100% in place, well, they're going to need to penetrate through the fire breaks.
Yeah, nice word. The rule of thumb to sort of bear in mind is if you're doing any intrusive work, anything intrusive, destructive, you're making a hole or whatever it is, management survey generally won't be covering all of those.
No, it doesn't. I mean, if you think we won't inspect inside ceiling wall voids.
No.
So if you're having a wall taken out or you're going through a wall, well, we've not checked it.
Yeah, and even potentially drilling into a wall as well.
Yeah.
You know, you don't know, although the surface might be tested, but if you're punching through that initial surface, it could be anything behind there.
Definitely.
Yeah. So.
And then demo surveys.
I was going to say, demo's just, the scope is generally pretty self-explanatory. You know, if the building's coming down, it's full access.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, it's kind of, they're not accessible afterwards, are they?
No, definitely not. Definitely not. The only thing to kind of bear in mind with demo surveys is sometimes we need to assist the demolition contractor at the end because we only use sort of hand surveying tools, things like that. We don't use machines and stuff. So when certain areas can only be accessed when the big machines roll into town.
Big breakers and start dismantling the whole sort of concrete structure or
exactly
whatever
that.
It is.
And
to get into all elements.
We've seen it as well before when the whole building's removed and you're just left with a floor slab. Well, even when the floor slab has been removed, we've had a lot of cases where asbestos insulation, asbestos insulating board, old asbestos cement, it's been dumped in there before backfilled, and the concrete base has basically been put on there.
Yeah, definitely. Okay.
So back to management plan.
Jumping back to the asbestos management plan. So once you've kind of you've worked out all your procedures, everything in place, and again, just to highlight, it's all the procedures should sort of cover all bases on how you're going to prevent people being exposed to asbestos. You also need to kind of identify who is the actual duty holder.
Yes.
And they need to be named in it, and also any responsible persons and what they're responsible for. Anyone who's identified within that plan has to have the relevant training to ensure that they can fulfil those roles within that. So yeah, duty holder and responsible person. So generally speaking, the duty holder is usually falls to the person right at the top of the organisation. So they need to be named in it, and then the responsible person. So who's actually gonna, generally speaking, they may not undertake all the points and fulfil all the obligations of the asbestos management plan.
No, they've just got the obligation to make sure it's happening.
Yeah, they're ultimately responsible, basically. But yeah, responsible person who's going to manage that process and make sure this is all carried out.
Yeah, and in that it should be details what kind of roles.
Yeah,
switch sides, roles and responsibilities.
Yeah.
Anything that they're destined to be doing as part of their job. Well, again, like we said, it needs to be documented, needs to be written down. It's got to be in there.
Yeah, it should also document how all of this is communicated, shared. So how are you going to provide all the asbestos information to whoever basically needs it? Really, it's any contractors coming on to work, the staff in the building, and if they need to know whatever they need to know, or external people, visitors even, that are coming in, they may need to be aware. And it's how you communicate that effectively without sort of scaring people and making people over worried. There may be additional training that's sort of identified and needed, because everyone knows that the word asbestos is quite emotive, so it's having all those procedures in place to fulfil that.
And again, kind of linking it back to the desktop study and the surveys and your sites, it all depends on what you've got. If you've got one site where you've got a few people working and that's it, well, your asbestos management plan is going to be a lot more simple than, say, a national institution that's got 1,000 sites across the country with 1,000 managers in and however many staff and so on.
Yeah.
So it is kind of horses for courses. It depends on where you're at, depends on how complex and how complicated it needs to be.
Yeah. So that's kind of the asbestos management plan.
Yep.
Yeah, ticked off. So what's next then? So next we're going to look at, so once you've got all that in place, you've got your management plans, next one is putting it into action, basically. So you've got everything planned, all your procedures in place. You need to make sure whatever you have planned, you put into action. So what steps are you taking to prevent people being exposed to asbestos? So this can go into various things. So whatever you've planned there, so it may be you've got some really high risk asbestos that really you can't do anything other than remove it.
Yep.
So if that's what you've planned to do, you need to make sure that happens. Where you've got maybe damaged asbestos that you may need to remediate, make sure that happens.
Yeah, and I mean remediate could be painting,
could be
clearing up, encapsulating, anything. I mean removal is
overboarding.
Yeah, there's a whole host of things that falls under the remediation. Back
to your example, it could be locking the door, and
yes,
making sure it's locked, or if that's not adequate, it could be maybe boarding it up or screwing the door shut even. So even if you have got the key, you can't easily get into there. Yep, so that's that.
Yeah,
remediate.
Well, and the thing is, off of both of those.
Off of both of those, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, you wouldn't pick up the phone and say, "Oh yeah, I've got a load of asbestos to remove, or I've got some asbestos to remediate. Can you come and crack on?" I mean, you could do, but the problem with that being is you might not get what you actually want. So both of these fall under specification.
Yeah.
And that's the big key word. We were talking about the specification for surveys. Equally, if not as more important, is the specification for asbestos removal and asbestos remediation projects.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Because with asbestos removal, there's lots of different ways of getting to one route, and there's lots of different ways to get to lots of different routes.
Yeah.
And if you've not got a clearly defined end result or end outcome that you want, then sometimes asbestos removal works. Yeah, the client can end up with the wrong job.
Yeah.
At the end.
I mean, with specifications, they really should start with the end in mind. To the fact of, well, what is it that you want? What do you want that area to look like? What do you want to happen?
Yeah.
And then work back from that. Because, I mean, take for instance the term environmental clean. It's been bandied around in the industry for donkey's years. However, if you ask 10 different people what environmental clean is, you'll get 10 different answers.
Yeah.
And that is where specification takes over from that. People can use the word environmental clean, however, they need to detail what environmental clean means to them.
Yeah. Is it just the floor? Is it all the surfaces? Are we going high level? It's that kind of thing. It's, you know, you really do have to be clear
Yes.
on exactly what you want the end result to be.
Yeah.
And define that in the specification.
I mean, just for instance, if you're, I don't know, say you were doing some data cabling and installing something in an office somewhere and the ceiling had asbestos insulating board tiles, well, the tiles can come down and in your mind you want a new ceiling to go up. Well, the specification needs to detail how that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And along with that, it could be that, well, to facilitate that, the entire ceiling and the tracking all needs to come down.
Yeah.
And it's little key points like that to discuss with the consultant who's putting the spec together and the removal contractors. Because one removal contractor might say, well, you can keep that actual ceiling grid, which is great, you think it's fantastic. But another contractor might come and price that same project and price it to remove everything. Now, that might sound a bit drastic, however, in reality, a lot of the time we find that the full wholesale removal of the ceiling tiles and the tracking works out to be a lot more cost effective.
Yeah.
Because the extra time that the contractors spend on cleaning, being careful in and around the actual tracking itself adds up to be a hell of a lot more time on the project,
Yeah.
which you would claw back if they went and removed the asbestos safely, dropped the tracking at the same time. The cost saving comes in at the end, because to put a new ceiling up, yes, it's a cost, but weighing that up against the cost of the removal, it comes in cheaper because it takes less time.
Yeah, it's basically the man hours to clean that is usually a lot more expensive than
Definitely.
Tracking on ceilings.
And the same with the analytical on that as well. If the ceiling tracking is left in on a project, well, every single millimetre of that tracking needs to be checked by the asbestos analyst.
Yeah.
So again, that's dragging out the kind of longevity, the long period that is going to be an asbestos enclosure.
Yeah, and to add an additional point to that, if you've got items that the asbestos is attached to, although with every will in the world, the responsibility is not to leave anything at risk, but there is a greater risk of something being missed. For instance, if you've got tracking that's had asbestos on it, there are instances where if something is to be missed, then it would be on the tracking. But if you're completely removing that tracking, you're eliminating that risk anyway.
Yep.
So specification, then leading on to specifications, obviously that then leads on to basically asbestos removal tender process, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Or remediation tenders.
Yeah. That falls under for both of them, really.
Yeah, tender process. So again, all these, the specification and tender, you should have a written procedure on how you're going to manage that within your asbestos management plan. Because it's okay if it's just one person, then they'll know, but this should be an all-encompassing procedure to follow on how you manage every element of your asbestos.
Yeah, so I mean the tender process is required because, well, who are you going to go to? Who are you going to use? What checks are in place that the contractors that you're going to meet your requirements for things like insurances? If you've got a high-risk site, well, you need to have high levels of insurance in place. Have you got an approved list? That kind of thing. So that's where the tender process really comes into its own, because again it's detailing in the same way that the asbestos management plan is detailing how you manage your asbestos. This process is detailing how you're planning to work on those actions.
Yeah, definitely. And what you should do is sort of describe by when's this going to be done, by who.
Yes, definitely. When,
Yeah,
and who.
exactly that. So when's it going to be done by, and who's responsible for action in all those points.
And that's the thing. It's if you've got asbestos removal that needs to take place, well, when is that going to happen? Is it going to be immediately, within a month? Is it going to be longer term, 3 months, 12 months, whatever? It just needs to be detailed so that you can see for yourself that there is an actual overriding plan for the site, for the asbestos.
Yeah. Okay, that covers kind of actions, I think. So what's next?
What's
then?
next?
So once you've got all this in place, so you've identified your asbestos, you now know what the what risk of people being exposed to asbestos. You've got your asbestos management plan written, which details all your procedures on how you manage that risk. You've put all of your procedures into action, detailed it by when and who's going to undertake those. And then really once that's all completed, you then fall into a kind of a regular inspect and review period.
So what do we mean by inspect and review?
So basically, it's just that ongoing review of your asbestos information, your procedures. Included in that, you should be undertaking a review of your register and plans, updating the assessment on the condition of your asbestos.
Yeah, so asbestos re-inspections.
Yep.
That covers that. So the asbestos re-inspection, it's to identify if anything has changed since the last assessment. So has the material deteriorated at all?
Yeah.
Have cracks appeared? Is the paint now bubbling? Has it become damaged by somebody knocking it, or mechanical knocking, i.e. I don't know, if you've got asbestos insulating board in a warehouse, it's not uncommon for forklift truck drivers to give it a little knock now and again.
Yeah. Yeah, so basically where this kind of comes back to your assessment, which will dictate how often you do those condition checks, because as we sort of gave the example earlier, you may have a high risk item in a high risk area, which checking it on an annual basis is not enough. That could come down to monthly, weekly, even daily, where you're having to do condition checks because of the risk factor associated with that asbestos material.
I've just linked re-inspections back to the surveys. It's not literally a survey, but it falls within that same...
Well, UCAS don't deem them as a survey, do they?
No, not deemed as a survey. But that's a good point. We didn't cover that earlier, actually, about who should do your surveys and who should do your re-inspections. Well, re-inspections need to be done by somebody who's competent.
Yeah.
HC defines somebody who's competent as they've got appropriate training, experience, other qualities is another thing, isn't it? And for the actual asbestos surveys, the HSE, they strongly recommend the use of UCAS accredited surveyors.
Yeah.
So UCAS, it's kind of like it's a baseline. If you think about other accreditations in other industries, essentially it's a baseline. There'll always be some companies that go way above and beyond. There'll be some that literally just meet that requirement and that's it. Yeah. But it gives you that baseline of I know they've met a certain criteria.
Yeah.
And what happens if you employ somebody who's not UCAS accredited, then it's your responsibility to make sure they meet all those requirements. You need to make sure that they are competent, they've got training, they've got knowledge, they've got experience with your type of surveys.
Yeah, so that kind of then falls in. So you've got a responsibility if there's any change within the building. So the change of use, you've undertaken a layout change, you've had a refurb. If anything changes, that should trigger a review of the asbestos management plan, because it may not be, and your assessments, because it may not be relevant to those changes anymore. Yeah. So that should always trigger a change and review.
And that's it. I mean, the asbestos management plan should be checked at this point as well.
Yeah.
register the plans, re-inspections. It's the review is the management plan actually working?
Yeah.
So that's why you're reviewing this.
That's it.
If back here you've said, right, like I suggested earlier, there'd be a book at reception that the contractors have to sign in. Well, this is the point when you need to make sure that it's happening, because that's what your management plan says. And if it's not happening, it's time to kind of review and identify why it's not happening. Has, I don't know, personnel changed? Is the process, is it too complicated? That kind of thing.
Yeah, or is it just lack of training? Maybe.
Yeah, lack of training.
Or
could they not be bothered?
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, but if something's not working, something that has to be changed.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, so yeah, that's really what that's in place to do. I think that kind of covers.
Does that cover everything? Is that our brain?
Yeah, so
our brain dump.
to review. Yeah, nice and simple. Just update the condition of it. Check your plans. If there's any changes, you need to obviously update your assessments. Even personnel changing, update those assessments accordingly.
Definitely.
Yeah, and just
and that's the big one. I mean, all the way along we see clients fall down a lot, but the keeping things up to date. That's always one where people fall down generally, because with the best will in the world, somebody else has done your surveys, the assessments are there, you've got a management plan in place, everything seems to be working all right. However, you then go off and you have stuff completed, but the paperwork doesn't get updated.
Yeah.
So then therefore that's the difficulty, is keeping everything up to date, and making sure it is what it actually is on site, what it's reflecting.
Particularly in bigger organisations where you've got multiple sites, multiple people doing activities, because what you need to be aware of is where you've got refurbishment surveys, they should be feeding in and updating the information, so that register and plans will be always updating, and that information will always be updating where you've had a refurb and the layout's changed. So it's kind of having all those procedures feeding in and just a constant evolution of asbestos information, procedures, working practices.
And backwards as well. So if you've had a survey done, it's identified asbestos before you've had a project done. As part of that project, you've had it removed. Well, then that survey report needs to be updated. And then when the re-inspections roll round, it's updated that it has been removed already. And you get the paperwork to match that up.
Yeah.
The paperwork then again is kind of, it falls into historical information, but it proves that you have had it completed appropriately, that you did use the correct contractors, things like that.
Yeah.
You need to kind of document that.
And the only thing to sort of add to this, aside from asbestos management, that kind of overarching assists this, is information, instruction and training. So, you know, training for the individuals in all these roles, and making sure that anyone who could come into contact with asbestos or who influences how those works carried out, they have to have asbestos awareness training.
Yeah.
And if you're managing this process, you probably going to want some additional management training for that.
Definitely. I mean, if you're in a role, and like Neil said, if you're responsible for other workers going out completing works, well, legally speaking, you do need the asbestos awareness training.
Yeah.
And if the duty holder has delegated the responsibilities to you, well, that's a lot of responsibility to take. So, I mean, a lot of people learn from reading and all the rest of it, but if you take the HSE stance on what makes somebody competent, well, it's training, experience, all the rest of it. So you would want to probably do a duty holder course in there, so you fully grasp and understand your requirements as such, because they're now on your shoulders.
Yeah, definitely. Anyone fulfilling any element of this has to have the appropriate training to fulfil those roles.
Yeah.
So that kind of covers it. So yeah, we go from desktop, you know, gathering that information, identifying where asbestos is, assessing the risk of people being exposed to asbestos there. That then helps you formulate your asbestos management plan and how, you know, the procedures you need to put in place to help people prevent people being exposed to asbestos. From your management plan, you then sort of determine your actions, what you need to do it, and how you're going to prevent people being exposed to it. That then leads on to your regular reviews and inspections of the information.
Yeah,
kind of covers it.
I think it covers it. What we're going to do, so you've got access to us. This is going out on YouTube. It's going out as a podcast. You've got access to us through our Facebook group, Asbestos Knowledge Empire. We'll stick a photograph of this in there, so you've got that to refer to, and you can use as kind of a bit of a map and a mind map. It's a brain dump from us. That's if you can read my writing. I've written in capital, so I've tried my best. Yeah, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Remember, asbestos first.